The first time I saw him, he was standing shirtless in the rain, hammer in hand, fixing the fence my husband promised to mend months ago. The world behind him blurred in the downpour, but I still remember how calm he looked, like a man who carried storms inside his chest and knew how to live with them. I told myself it was nothing, just a glance too long, just curiosity. But in that quiet ache between thunder and guilt, something in me began to unravel. If stories like this make you wonder how easily loyalty can bend, how even good people can fall into impossible choices, subscribe, because every untold confession deserves to be heard before it fades into silence. The day he arrived, the air was heavy with the kind of heat that makes silence feel alive. My husband had left early again. A quick kiss on the forehead, the faint smell of cologne, a promise to be home before dark that we both knew was a lie. When the door closed, the echo of his footsteps faded like a ritual I'd grown numb to. I was halfway through my coffee when the truck pulled up, its engine growling like something out of place in our too-quiet street. He stepped out, tall, built in that unassuming way that comes from work, not the gym. His hands looked rough even from a distance, veins mapping a life I didn't understand but suddenly wanted to. He caught me watching from the window, just a glance, no smile, no nod, and got straight to work. The fence had been falling apart for months, leaning like it was tired of standing between us and the world. My husband said he'd fix it himself. He never did. For the first few days, I pretended not to notice him. I kept myself busy, folding laundry, cleaning dishes that were already clean, scrolling through photos from a time that felt foreign now. But the rhythm of his hammer became impossible to ignore. It was steady, grounding, like a pulse that reminded me I was still here. Sometimes he hummed, low and off-key, and that sound filled the spaces my husband's voice had left empty. By the fourth morning, curiosity won. I opened the kitchen window and let the air drift in, the scent of pine, sweat, and something warm I couldn't name. He looked up once, just once, when a piece of wood splintered under his hand. "Careful," I said, surprising both of us with the sound of my voice. He smiled faintly, as if he hadn't heard a human sound in days. "Nothing I can't handle," he said, voice rough, words slow and deliberate. From that day, the distance between us changed shape. I started timing my mornings around his. I'd linger by the counter, pretending to water the plants or wipe the same spot twice, just to hear him move. There was no flirting, not yet, just presence. It was strange how comforting that could be. He didn't fill the silence, he honored it. And in a house where silence usually screamed, that felt like mercy. One afternoon, clouds gathered early, the sky bruising with rain. He worked through it, rain sliding down his back, shirt clinging to him like second skin. I should have gone inside. I didn't. I stood under the porch, pretending to check the weather, watching water drip from his hair. He looked up, met my gaze, and for a heartbeat the world stilled. It wasn't attraction that passed between us, not exactly. It was recognition. Two people who didn't belong where they were, seeing themselves reflected in the other's stillness. When my husband called that night, I let it ring twice before answering. He said he'd be staying late again, voice casual, background noise of laughter that wasn't mine. I told him the fence was nearly done. He didn't ask who was fixing it. I didn't offer the name. By the weekend, the fence stood straight and whole. He knocked on the door to tell me the job was done. I hadn't expected him to. He never used the front entrance before. When I opened it, he held his cap in his hand, eyes soft but unreadable. "You'll need to let the wood dry before you stain it," he said. I nodded, too aware of how close he stood. Rain began to fall again, light this time, tapping against the porch like a warning. "Thank you," I said, though the words felt too small. He looked at me a moment longer than necessary, then turned and walked back to his truck. I watched him drive away until the sound of the engine vanished into the rain. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off, staring at the fence. It looked perfect, solid, seamless, dividing our home from everything beyond it. But I couldn't stop thinking that perfection was just another kind of lie. Because deep down I already knew, some boundaries once touched never truly hold again. The next morning felt different. The fence stood gleaming in the sunlight, finished and flawless, yet the house felt emptier than it ever had. My husband had left early again, his absence now a routine stitched into the fabric of my mornings. I tried to busy myself, cleaned the counters, rearranged the same fruit bowl twice, and opened windows I didn't need to. But when I glanced outside, the quiet unsettled me. For days, that rhythm of hammer and saw had been the heartbeat of my solitude, and now it was gone. I told myself it was foolish to miss it, to miss him. But the ache came anyway, steady and persistent, like an echo you can't unhear once it's found your walls. By noon, I heard the crunch of gravel, that same truck pulling up the driveway. My pulse stumbled. He stepped out carrying a small toolbox. "Forgot a wrench," he said. But the way his eyes lingered on mine told me that wasn't the full truth. I didn't ask him in. He didn't need me to. He followed me to the backyard, where sunlight spilled unevenly across the fence he built. He worked quietly, tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. I stood nearby, watching his hands move with calm precision. When he finally straightened, our eyes met again. "You ever build anything yourself?" he asked. I almost laughed. "I've tried. It never lasts." He smiled, that slow, tired kind of smile that carries too much understanding. Before he left, I offered him coffee. Just that, coffee. It felt harmless. Maybe it was. We sat on the porch, mugs between our hands, rain clouds forming again in the distance. He didn't talk much, and I liked that about him. There was something in his silence that felt safe, something unspoken that filled the air more honestly than words could. Days passed like that. Small conversations, quiet visits, excuses that started to sound less like reasons and more like confessions. He'd stop by to check the wood, and I'd let him. Sometimes we talked about nothing. The weather, the smell of rain, the way the world slows down right before a storm. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way his thumb traced the rim of his mug when he was thinking. I started to memorize things I shouldn't. One afternoon, I told him my husband used to play the piano, that it had been months since I'd heard music in this house. He looked toward the living room, where the piano sat covered in dust. "You could play," he said softly. "You don't need someone else to make the noise." I didn't respond. But that night, when I was alone again, I lifted the lid and pressed a single key. The sound rang through the empty rooms like a ghost waking up. Guilt came in waves. I told myself it was friendship, that nothing had happened, that nothing would happen. But the truth is, something had already shifted, not in action, but in intention. I began to crave his presence the way people crave sunlight after too many gray days. I'd catch myself looking out the window, hoping to see that truck again, hoping he'd forgotten something else. It was a Thursday when he finally stayed longer than he should have. The rain came heavy, trapping him beneath the porch. I made tea this time, something warm to fill the silence. Lightning flashed, thunder followed, and we stood there side by side, not speaking. When he finally looked at me, it wasn't a glance. It was something deeper, searching, like he wanted permission to breathe the same air I did. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move. His hand brushed mine, barely, accidentally, but the air cracked with something electric. I felt the weight of every vow I'd made pressing down on me, reminding me of who I was supposed to be. I stepped back first. He nodded, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. When he left, I stood in the doorway long after the sound of his truck faded. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain, the piano key still echoing faintly in my mind. My husband texted around midnight, "Long day. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, then deleted it. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't lonely because I was unloved. I was lonely because I had stopped loving the life I'd built. And I couldn't tell if that truth was freedom or damnation. The night everything fell apart began quietly. The kind of quiet that carries warning, that holds its breath before the sky decides to break. My husband had promised again to be home for dinner. I'd cooked, something I hadn't done properly in weeks, and set the table with care I didn't understand anymore. By 8, the food was cold. By 9, I'd stopped checking my phone. By 10, I heard the sound I wasn't supposed to be waiting for. Tires crunching over gravel, the low rumble of a truck I knew too well. He was back. The worker. I didn't ask why. Maybe I already knew. Maybe I wanted him to give me a reason not to care anymore. He said he needed to return a tool he'd borrowed, but the words sounded thin, rehearsed, fragile against the night air. We stood in the doorway, shadows stretching long between us. Rain began again, steady and relentless, the sky echoing the storm I'd been pretending not to feel. I should have told him to leave. I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside. Inside, everything smelled of memory. Candle wax, old wine, the faint ghost of perfume on my skin. He placed the wrench on the counter, his eyes avoiding mine. "You shouldn't be alone this much," he said quietly. "You deserve more than this emptiness." The truth is, I didn't know what I deserved anymore. My reflection in the window looked foreign, someone who used to know herself and now only existed in fragments. I turned toward him, words trembling on my tongue. And for a moment we just stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, far enough to pretend it was still innocent. Then thunder cracked and everything inside me snapped with it. His hand found my face, rough and shaking, like he'd been holding that urge for too long. I didn't resist. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was desperate, clumsy, full of things that shouldn't have been said out loud. It didn't taste like romance. It tasted like confession, but guilt moves fast. It doesn't wait for the morning. It hit the second our lips parted, cold and sharp. "We shouldn't," I whispered, stepping back. He nodded, eyes heavy with regret. "I know." But neither of us moved to fix it. That was when I heard it, the sound of keys in the front door. My stomach turned to ice. My husband was home, early. For the first time in months, panic bloomed like fire. The worker froze, eyes wide, searching for escape. The rain outside roared, drowning everything except the sound of the door unlocking. I grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the back hallway, heart pounding so loud I was sure it could be heard. My husband stepped into the kitchen just as the worker slipped out the side door. He looked tired, soaked from the rain, briefcase still in hand. His eyes scanned the room, the plates, the wine glasses, the half-burned candle. "You cooked?" he said, voice cautious. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt painted on. He noticed the open window next. "Someone was here?" he asked. "No," I said too quickly. "Just needed some air." The silence that followed was unbearable. He didn't question further. Maybe he didn't want to. He kissed my forehead, mechanical, distant, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stood there, frozen, rain dripping through the open window, pooling at my feet. But the universe doesn't hide sins for long. 2 days later, he found the wrench, the same one the worker had returned, sitting neatly behind the counter. "Didn't the guy say he was done?" my husband asked. "Why's this still here?" I didn't have an answer. He looked at me too long, suspicion flickering behind his eyes like the first spark of fire. He didn't ask again, not that day. But something between us shifted, silent and irreversible. That evening, while washing dishes, I saw him outside through the kitchen window, standing by the fence, running his hand along the wood, tracing the seams. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, but I could feel it, the storm building, the truth swelling just beneath the surface. By the time the next rain came, the house was colder, the air heavy with everything unsaid. And when it finally broke, when my husband turned to me one night, eyes wet not with anger but disbelief, the words I'd been hiding slipped out before I could stop them. "I'm sorry," I said. "It wasn't supposed to happen." The silence that followed felt eternal. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just looked at me, as if trying to find the woman he thought he knew somewhere inside the stranger in front of him. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than the rain. "I knew," he said. I just wanted to be wrong. I watched him walk away, not in fury, but in silence. And I realized that the sound of a door closing can hurt more than any scream. After he left, the house became unbearably still. It wasn't just silence, it was absence. The kind that hums in the walls, the kind that makes every room sound like it's breathing without you. For the first few days, I moved through the space like a ghost, touching things he'd once touched, rearranging objects not because they were out of place, but because I was. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than it ever had, marking time I no longer knew how to fill. I didn't hear from my husband again for weeks. No calls, no messages, just a single envelope left on the kitchen counter one afternoon, his handwriting small and weary. Inside was a note that said only, "Take care of yourself." Nothing more. No anger, no accusations. Somehow that made it worse. I had braced myself for punishment, for screaming, for something that could at least remind me I still mattered. But indifference, that was a wound that didn't bleed. The worker never came back either. The day after the confession, I found his gloves resting by the fence, stiff from the rain. I kept them for a while, tucked away in a drawer I didn't open often. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed proof that it wasn't all imagined, that there had been another heartbeat in this story besides my own. Nights were the hardest. The bed felt too large, the air too thin. I'd lie there listening to the city outside, the hum of distant cars, the occasional bark of a dog, and try to remember when ordinary life stopped feeling ordinary. Some nights I'd dream of him, not the man I married. Not the man who built the fence, but both of them blurred together, one watching, one leaving, both unreachable. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the sharpness of it dulled. The guilt softened, like an old bruise fading under the skin. I started spending more time outside, sitting near the fence. The wood had dried by then, its color lighter, the scent of rain replaced by dust. From a distance it looked flawless, smooth, aligned, unbroken. But when I traced my fingers along the grain, I could still feel the tiny ridges where the boards met, the faint unevenness that no amount of sanding could hide. Imperfections only visible up close. It reminded me of myself. One afternoon I decided to paint it. The sun was high, the air still, and as I brushed the wood with long strokes, I thought about how strange it was to cover something real with color, to make it new, to make it seem untouched. With every stroke, I whispered apologies no one would ever hear. To my husband, to the worker, to the woman I used to be before I mistook attention for affection, loneliness for need. I wish I could say I found peace, that I learned my lesson, that I grew from it. But the truth is more complicated. Healing doesn't feel like redemption. It feels like learning to live with the parts of yourself you don't want anyone to see. Sometimes when it rains, I still open the kitchen window. The sound of water against the fence carries me back to those days. The smell of wet wood, the warmth of a glance that should have meant nothing. I don't look for him anymore. I don't imagine him driving by, but I wonder if he ever thinks of me when the storms roll in, if he remembers how quietly we almost ruined everything. My husband and I never spoke again. I heard through someone mutual that he moved to another city, that he still wears his wedding ring but never mentions my name. I can't blame him. Some memories deserve their silence. The fence stands strong now, aging gracefully under the seasons. It keeps the world out just as it's meant to. But every time I walk by, I pause and touch the place where two boards meet, the smallest seam, barely visible in the light. It's my reminder that boundaries, once broken, never fully mend. You can rebuild them, paint them, even make them beautiful again. But deep down, you'll always know where they cracked. And maybe that's what love really is, not perfection. Not forever, just the hope that someone might still stand on the other side, willing to see you through the splinters. Because even now, after everything, when the wind passes through that fence, it sounds almost like a heartbeat. Mine, and the echoes of what could never be.